Hello, everybody. My name is Stuart Popejoy, and I'm really excited to join you for this fireside chat. My name is Stuart Popejoy. I'm the CEO of Kadena, and I'm joined by the esteemed Stuart Haber, who we're very excited to have with us today. And we're going to talk about a lot of really interesting things. I'll let Stuart Haber introduce himself. But first I wanted to just give for people who are new to Kadena, give you a quick intro to what Kadena is all about, and Stuart Haber being an advisor to our team in cryptography and many other things. So if you're new to Kadena, Kadena is a braided high throughput proof of work system. And it's built by Kadena, which was founded by myself and my co-founder, William Martino, in 2016, where we had led the JP Morgan Blockchain Center of Excellence. So what's unique about Kadena from other projects is that first, we're the only project to scale proof of work. And this means that we can grow our network limitlessly without sacrificing security and always provide enough throughput for any application that might ever come along, and without sacrificing any security and without using up any more hash rate. That combined with our smart contract language, Pact, which is we're able to build fast, secure, and scalable blockchain apps that scale across the chains on our network safely, including our protocol coin, KDA, which is actually a Pact smart contract. So between Pact and our scalable blockchain network, we're a protocol that can be used for any type of application, from NFTs to DeFi to enterprise blockchain. And the capacity of our network is such that today we could settle the entire stock market on Kadena each day without a sweat. So this is, we're here today because this is all made possible by the initial discovery of blockchain technology. Joining us today is one of the most cited authors of the Bitcoin in the Bitcoin white paper, Stuart Haber. Stuart, along with his co-author, Scott Stornetta, were the ones to have made the first blockchain by conceptualizing the idea of a timestamped digital document and deploying it commercially in the 90s. So on that note, now you know who Stuart Haber is. I'll turn it over to Stuart so he can tell you where he's coming from and how he made this whole blockchain thing happen. Hi, Stuart.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're sitting and whether you're watching this now or at some point in the future. Stuart, it's a pleasure to be here, joining you in front of the Kadena and Kadena interested public.
Sure, thanks for joining us.
So I suppose the place to start is to tell a brief version of the genesis of the blockchain idea. I was a cryptographer. I was a newly hatched cryptographer at Bell Communications Research, in which, for those who are old enough, was the Bell Labs of the local phone companies, the baby bells, as they were called, when Ma Bell broke up. Built very much, Bellcore was and modeled on the legendary Bell Labs of Ma Bell. So I'd been there a couple of years, and working as a cryptographer. I'd written my thesis before that on zero knowledge proof and multi-party computation, when that was brand new stuff. A new hire came to the lab, a young guy named Scott Stornetta, and he was very worried about the problem of ensuring the integrity of digital records of all kinds. As you know, remember, this was 1989. The internet existed, the World Wide Web didn't yet, but it was clear that all of the world's records were moving online, and we worried about how to ensure their integrity. And if you think about that a moment, because a digital record is a single thing, you need, the only sensible way of addressing the problem at all is to have some sort of algorithm system for registering a document somehow, and thereby producing a digital certificate of some kind that can be validated or verified to prove the integrity of the original record. Public key cryptography already existed at that time. One-way hash functions were already around, not widely deployed, but they were around. So the obvious solution was what we called the hash and sign solution. Trust some entity to sign an assertion. I saw these bits at this time. That's where, of course, these bits is the one-way hash value of the record in question. Of course, so that's fairly straightforward, but Scott and I were enormously dissatisfied with that solution because it required trusting the signer, the signing person or entity or company that or piece of hardware. Back then, there was a company that was trying to make a business of hash and sign timestamping, but the time they would write down in their timestamp certificate came from a several $1 million atomic clock, which they'd be happy to sell you as part of the system. So we wanted to ensure the integrity of digital records without relying on a single centralized, trusted entity of any kind. We had trouble actually doing that. We couldn't. We were knocking our heads against the wall, and started working on actually proving that there's no better way of doing it. Now, as anybody who's spent any time in a course of a mildly mathematical or theoretical nature about computer science has already seen, proving that you can't do something, proving something is impossible, proving a negative, as they say about things outside mathematics too, is much harder than proving a positive. To say something precise about why a computational task is impossible, you have to very, very carefully specify the model of computation and all sorts of other things. And so we couldn't do that, or we had trouble doing that. But while thinking about the model of computation, Scott and I realized that by, as it were, having the whole world watching what we're doing, we could enable the validation, verification of digital records in a way that did not require trusting a single entity. And we designed over the course of a couple of papers. First one was in 1990, second in 91. But by 91, we already had design, which you would now call the blockchain, a hash-linked chain of roots of Merkle trees of hash values of individual records.
Right, and then so shortly thereafter, you guys would actually start a commercial venture that would start basically time-stamping digital documents in this thing that wasn't yet called a blockchain.
Right. Yeah, of course, we didn't, when I give talks about this now, I talk about grouping records into what I'll now call a block, and blah blah blah, Merkle root, and so on, and then link this to that, and hey, it looks like a chain. So so we spun out of Belcore a company called Surety, Surety, and deployed a service for certifying and then checking the integrity of digital records called Surety. And we now in '95, I said something about having the whole world watching, to use words that we weren't using at the time, but to achieve worldwide consensus on the values of the hash values, the exact hash values that were ensuring the records validated by Surety. We once a week built a Merkle hash tree that depended on the entire week's traffic, and thereby, because of the chaining, all our traffic since what we also did not call our Genesis block, we put that ad they put that hash value in a small classified ad in the national edition of the Sunday New York Times. Now that blockchain is in fact still running. Here's the New York Times on paper, delivered to my New York apartment. What's today? Oh, yeah, yesterday. Sunday New York Times. And inside here is a classified ad. You can, oops, there you go, circled there. And there's a hash value there, every bit of which depends on every request that Surety has received since it was first running commercially in early '95. And in fact, Scott and I recently rediscovered the first such ad we placed in the New York Times in 1991, when it was the first version of the code was running in Belcore.
Oh, that's earlier than I thought. Or I think you've told me before. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was a recent rediscovery. Like
18 years before Bitcoin.
Right. That's and great. So when Satoshi, so our company Surety was, let's say, not exactly a raging success, but made a little money, did something for a few customers, and just a minute. Yeah. But when Satoshi was putting together the Bitcoin system, they needed a way to ensure the integrity of digital records. The best solution for exactly that was what Satoshi adopted, and beautifully linked the hash linking, brought together the hash linking with the idea of mining to ensure the completely self-contained security of the system.
Right. The proof of work part is what replaces the New York Times, but it's the same data structure.
Right.
The integrity is guaranteed by the data structure, but the thing that makes it not necessary to use something like the New York Times is the proof of work consensus. So it's that addition to the blockchain, to the the exact same design. I think another interesting thing is hash functions had matured by the time Satoshi came along. I believe you had to do something kind of interesting with hash functions because of your lack of having a warm and fuzzy feeling about hash functions in the early '90s. Isn't that right?
So yeah. So in fact, the same way that Scott and I wanted to not to rely on the trustworthiness of a single entity, the signing timestamp server in a hash and sign solution, we also wanted to minimize our dependence on, as much as possible, including mathematical assumptions. So all of the blockchain world depends on the presumption that it's hard to find what are called hash collisions. That is, two records with the same hash value. So we worried about that, and hash functions fall down on a job. They get broken, especially now that they're such a sitting target protecting so many billions of dollars. But we worried about that already. And when we first deployed the system in 91, we used two hash functions. So in every invocation of a hash function, when I give a public talk about this, I talk about digital fingerprinting. Every digital fingerprint of a bit string was its MD5 hash value concatenated with its SHA-1 hash value.
Both of which were eventually shown to have collisions.
Right, and
but the combination, it's pretty hard to find.
Well, in fact, and we did that not just for submissions of records, but building the Merkle tree.
Right.
Building.
And so there's two values in the New York Times, right?
Well, you can't. You have to take a base 64 string and figure out how many bits and so on. Right. So already in 1991, we specifically spoke about how to swap in a new hash function should that be necessary. And Surety actually did that when the entire crypto world was completely shaken by realizing how little it knew about hash functions. When at crypto as in cryptography, and crypto as in the name of the main technical conference in the field, which started in 81 and has been running every summer except the pandemic summers where it's virtual, but it's in August every year in Santa Barbara. And that's where Scott and I presented our work in 1990. And at the 94, I believe it was, conference, a completely unknown researcher from China, Professor Xiaoyun Wang, she showed that she could break MD5. And MD5 cryptographers said, there were certain weaknesses in MD5. Maybe you should switch to SHA-1 or SHA-256, which was already there and is the one Satoshi chose for Bitcoin. But practitioners did not believe cryptographers saying, this is dangerous until Xiaoyun Wang at the rump session at Crypto showed two strings, two short blocks that had the same MD5 value. And since a month or two later, Surety's been using SHA-256 and RIPE MD 160, which is a European standard that
and is used in Bitcoin.
Pretty good now.
For some of the hashing in Bitcoin, public key hashing in Bitcoin, I believe.
Yes, RIPE MD. RIPE MD is used in the code for Bitcoin, but it's
not in the Merkle.
It's sort of I think it's a silly use.
No, there was that whole thing where they were trying to hide the public key because they were worried about the public key being a source of of leaking the private key somehow, or at least that's kind of colloquial.
But you can't hide it because you actually use it for.
Well, to use it, the whole idea would be that you could send money to it, and then you would have to spend that money, and then yes, of course, you reveal it when you spend it. But the idea is that until you spend it, it would be entirely secret.
Right. All right. So anyway, these were ancient stories.
It's great stuff, though. I mean, this is really how it all started, because I think, it's been said many times, but for me as an engineer, I'm not a cryptographer, although I play one on TV sometimes, hanging out with Stuart. That as an engineer, one of the things we seek to do in engineering is, try to take proven techniques and make small innovations on them so that you can, rest on a foundation that is very solid. This is very important to Kadena.
And some small innovations are bigger than others, and some are turn out to be rather more important than others.
Right, and and small, is in quotes, but small from the point of view of like, not adding a lot of complexity, not making some stuff out of whole cloth. So the Bitcoin white paper is one of the most, brilliant documents ever written for this reason, because just in the sheer kind of minimization of what Satoshi is bringing to the table, he's taking proof of work, which was already well established. He's taking the Haber Stornetta blockchain, which is already very well established. I think even the UTXO system, the transactional system, was something that he was drawing on existing designs for. I'll say he, we don't know. Right. And what's more, one of the things that, and he talks about in the paper how the system's very resilient because of things it doesn't have to rely on. Like, you don't need to have a reliable mempool. Even though in practice that's important, this is an example of how you want your kind of core design to only focus on what's really important for the integrity of the system. And right. That's how such a relatively short paper can really pretty fully describe the Bitcoin system by resting on the shoulders of giants such as yourself and all this other work, and then just providing the tiny bit of glue and really the concept, and kind of the motivation to get it going.
And besides what you haven't mentioned though, besides the paper, is the code.
Yes,
which is
right, because there is more to it actually. The paper,
the Bitcoin system, just from the paper, that would be quite a job to deploy a system, and so Satoshi had an implemented system, and deployed it. What 2 or 3 months after the paper first started circulating, namely January 2009, I believe.
Yeah, and in that code, is one of the things the paper doesn't discuss is the Bitcoin script system, which, as you and I have been discussing recently, is kind of one of Pact, our smart contract language Pact. Its core inspiration actually comes from Bitcoin script, which, since it's a bytecode, the temptation is to see it as some kind of machine language, but it's actually just a very small language. That originally was capable of doing quite complex smart contracts until, for security reasons, and probably with very good reasons, Bitcoin Core developers locked down Bitcoin script to only do, basically recognize a very small amount of templates to do these very standardized transactions. But when it launched, and again, he doesn't really go into this in the paper, but it launched with a very flexible, arguably, this is something that Pact really tried to preserve, is the tremendous flexibility of ownership that is presented by the Bitcoin script system. And that being something that, kind of changed when Ethereum came along, because Ethereum used a bytecode, but for Ethereum's purposes, that really does function more like a machine language, and not like what I see Bitcoin as really a scripting language that's basically a bytecode just so that it'll be small and have a canonical representation. Since Satoshi was a cryptographer, that was very important to them. So but again, it's all these like it's all these little design decisions, not little, but that made Bitcoin still to my mind the preeminent secure application running in public, which is just something that didn't exist before. But I think your blockchain was very interesting in the sense that it introduced this public element, like you said, the idea that it solved a problem for you. And I think that's something people, should always keep in mind when they're thinking about blockchain, is that, the transparency of blockchain is not some kind of weakness to engineer away. It's precisely the transparency of blockchain is part of its security.
It's at the very center of the story.
Yeah, which I think,
even though we all of us in the blockchain world now spend endless sentences mentioning decentralization, but the point is is transparency. And another point there about the essence of what we were trying to do. So we called the what we were trying to do with what's now called the blockchain data structure. We called it digital timestamping, which distracts people because they worry. They think too much about the exact time, down to the exact value of the time according to that several million $1995 worth of atomic clock. The point is a digital an unforgeable digital timestamp certificate for a record is a proof that exactly that bit string was registered with the system and thereby registered with the entire world, coincidentally, perhaps at a certain time. But for most records, what you care about is what is exactly in that record.
Right, and the order just being part of the integrity properties, in the sense it came before this document and after that document.
Right.
And that's time, but it's not.
So, and time, so the point, the thought I already lost, but our notion of time, that's a social construct. The only way we have found so far, still haven't been able to prove anything about lower bounds and impossibility, but the only way we've found so far to link bits to the human social construct of time is by linking in the social construct, make things witnessable.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think. But
let's come back. Let's go a little. Let's come to
the present. I think that So again, this is something when Will and I were at JP Morgan, we were advising on strategic investments as well as researching and building blockchain systems, which meant in 2015 we met pretty much everybody in blockchain at the time. Vitalik came in. Pretty much every project that was going on was something. So we had a fairly luxuriant position from which we launched Kadena in terms of being able to consider a lot of different design approaches. And that's why I bring up Pact, because we had studied Ethereum very carefully, and we had by
the way, maybe you should actually say that's Pact, P-A-C-T.
Yes,
for those who have not spent a lot of time on Kadena's website.
Yes, Pact is our smart contract language, and we developed it in the first years of our founding. And one of the things was, in looking around, was trying to find something to base it off of, and not really finding anything that we felt was safe enough, and felt kind of gave the right combination of make it easy to do the kind of things you want to do on a blockchain, but restrict the developer in kind of principled ways so that they can't shoot themselves in the foot, and have the kinds of exploits that we're now seeing occurring almost every day on Ethereum.
Let me call out that word, principled. I'm not a programming languages guy at all, but when I first heard about what Kadena was doing with Pact, I was enormously attracted by Stuart's and Will's principled approach to designing the language.
And, and the idea there was that there was a lot of really great stuff that Bitcoin had introduced. I mean, just the idea of it not being Turing complete, and the idea being that, that Turing completeness as it exists in something like Ethereum, you don't really get the benefits of it because it's a gas metered environment anyway. So it'll be operationally Turing incomplete, but you get all the risks of a Turing complete
for free. That comes, you don't even have to pay for the risk.
Right. And, and this isn't to trash Ethereum. I mean, as like you were saying, the use of RipeMD, there's lots of things in Bitcoin that, in hindsight, we can criticize. And there's lots of things in Ethereum that in hindsight, we can criticize. And certainly they are experiencing a lot of challenges based on some of those, criticizable design decisions. But, you can't. Likewise with Ethereum, you can't take from Ethereum the fact that they, since Bitcoin, Bitcoin had arguably a not secure enough scripting system to make the core developers feel comfortable with letting it run unrestrictedly. Ethereum obviously went much further with that. And while, certainly it's hard to write secure smart contracts in Ethereum, the one thing that smart contracts don't do in Ethereum is crash Ethereum. So it depends on how you define safety. Smart contracts in Ethereum are 100% safe in the sense that they will never introduce some kind of like buffer overflow or, there's no kind of like Bobby Tables kind of, SQL injection or any of that stuff in the very tightly specified EVM as designed by Gavin Wood. So like it's, so like they got it right, they obviously got more right than they got wrong, and they're in that position where they get lots of slings and arrows because they're the leaders and they're the ones we focus on. And we learned, one of our original prototypes was going to be an EVM-based system, and it just was something that so Pact really went back to Bitcoin, tried to solve some of the problems in the Bitcoin Bitcoin setup, because it really has to do with how the bytecode is executed that can make it unsafe, and then just try to like go from there and similarly try to do something minimal in the sense of we based it on Lisp. We wanted to use something, we knew we wanted it to be interpreted because that's
talk about basing it on something that's been around for a while.
Yes,
Lisp.
Correct. And
let's go back to the beginning.
Let's go back to the 50s. The IBM, I forget which IBM it was, but the IBM machine running a Lisp interpreter, a fully interpreted language in the 50s, and not running machine code, but actually recognizing strings of Lisp expressions and executing them. And that indeed is important to Pact because the idea. Another thing, again, when people see Bitcoin as a bytecode, they think, oh, that's machine language, you can't read it. That's not true. It's actually very easy to read Bitcoin script. You got to print the names of the opcodes. You can't just read the binary, but once you turn it into its kind of equivalent assembly, those scripts are very easy to read. And that was the guiding light for Pact as well, was that, it should be, it should be the kind of thing that like you can show to your lawyer, you can show to your, your board.
And that code is actually written to the blockchain.
Right, and that's and on Bitcoin and as well as in Pact, and that's why one of the reasons why it's a Lisp is that if you look at the structure of Lisp, it actually shows you the exact kind of hierarchical formulations that make code. So there's no distance, there's no kind of magic happening between the code and what's on the blockchain. So human readable on the blockchain, Turing incomplete. And then from there, it's just about trying to make it easy, trying to make it as kind of straightforward and simple as possible, which, with smart contracts isn't always that easy. But right, when you and I met, I believe that was in 2017, late 2017.
That's correct.
And that was at Jonathan Mohan's Bitcoin meetup, New York
Yes,
Bitcoin.
you're right. For those who don't know, we are both New Yorkers, and we
Yes. I'm in Brooklyn.
Back.
Where? What are you in the?
I'm in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan.
Lower Manhattan. Yeah.
Union Square to be
Right.
to name the neighborhood. But before the pandemic, we and many others went to meetings
mingle.
and mingled. And there was a Bitcoin meetup. This was Jonathan Mohan's irregular, semi-regular meeting, and I went to a meeting.
But the first blockchain meetup in New York, and and kind of the definitely,
yes, right,
an OG Bitcoin meetup in New York for sure.
Right. So I went to one of these meetings late December. So for blockchain world regulars, the topic of that was the recently discovered parity wallet bug, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And we were in a meeting room somewhere. There was a guy sitting somewhere near me who kept on piping up and saying smart things about and seemingly informed things about the parity wallet and the code involved and all sorts of things. And Jonathan called him Stuart.
Right.
And then so I had to introduce myself, and discovered to my pleasure that Stuart spells his name correctly.
Right. Yeah. There's all those incorrect spellings.
And so we so that was a brief meeting, but right after the New Year's break or something like that, I went all the way to Brooklyn to meet Stuart, the other Stuart, and other Stuart, and we hit it off. And I heard about what Kadena was doing. So what we haven't discussed very much in here is the data structure of Chainweb, which is several.
Which is the protocol for our scalable proof of work.
We talk about Kadena and we say scalable proof of work. The name of the protocol that makes scalable proof of work possible is Chainweb. That's the braided chain protocol. And we had, I think, we were heads down, working on not just the implementation but also security proofs and trying to do the reasoning to kind of figure out what it was that Will had designed when he combined these concept of graphs with the beta coin, the kind of two blockchain Bitcoin concepts that came out of Mt. Gox and things like that.
You said, well, Chainweb is the protocol. I think of it as the data structure. But
oh, definitely, yeah, totally. That you're right, because the adjacent, the whole idea that you have to refer to other chains as hash does meaningfully modify the kind of classic Merkle, the Haber Stornetta,
So in fact, Scott and I have 3 footnotes in the Whitecoin paper, but in fact,
3
in our third
home, that's Stuart Haber and Scott Stornetta are the most cited authors in the original Bitcoin white paper, with referring 3 separate papers, and that's more than any. There's a bunch of other luminaries in the Bitcoin white paper, but they are the most cited.
And several other luminaries, for example, the inventors of proof of work, who are not mentioned,
right?
And the inventor, that's Moni Naor and Cynthia Dwork, and the inventor of consensus mechanisms, arguably the inventor of distributed computing, that's Leslie Lamport, who also isn't mentioned. So, but I mentioned the footnotes just to say that in our third paper, Scott and I explicitly mentioned the possibility of building different data structures using hash functions in the as we said in so many words, any directed acyclic graph of hash values works for the purpose, as long as, we didn't use this word, but as long as there's a consensus mechanism for certain ones of those hash values.
Right. So at the time, you were the person who, introduced us to the literature surrounding expander graphs, which was, really.
Oh, you're right. So you were talking about the data structure, and I came to visit their office when there were only 3 people. No, well,
yeah, that's
three
right.
and a half people, depending on.
Well, Viv was there, yeah.
I mean, part-time. So
part-time, right?
3.5 or 4
Monica,
people.
Will, and
I. And I saw what they were doing, and I was quite excited about it. And I helped. I think I gave you some pointers into the algorithmic literature about expander graphs and so on. And to say what you actually had there was a growing family of expander graphs. So what enables the Chainweb data structure to scale so seamlessly is a particular data structure about graphs with lots of vertices, very, very well connected, without many edges. And that's a well-studied notion in combinatorics, and which by now is merged with theoretical computer science. But those were
different planets.
And Kadena makes brilliant use of that for to achieve the scalability. Still proof of work based scalability that they have.
And then the other thing is that we are trying to basically expand going back to the Bitcoin white paper, there's the security proof, the kind of closed form security proof that's in the Bitcoin white paper. And at the time, you were instrumental in the discussions that made us realize that we were not going to be able to achieve such a closed form solution, which is what got us to get involved with Tarun and Gauntlet. And interestingly enough, Gauntlet is such an impressive company. They've done all the kind of core research for a lot of the exciting new DeFi models. This was the first study they did, and it's where they rolled out their agent-based simulations, and that was the paper that you're an author on, which was now referred to as the Chainweb security paper. And that one being the one that basically demonstrated the kind of security properties that are intuitively understandable, in the sense that having more chains does not decrease security. This is one of the things that makes Chainweb such an exciting thing for me as an engineer, is that normally the world of computer programming is a world of trade-offs. You get every time you get something gets taken away, and so the idea that I can get more throughput and more security, and the cost at that point is bandwidth, and and maybe disk space size.
So there is a price. It's the bandwidth, but
right.
But just to be clear, the bandwidth is minimized by that choice of graphs. The low degree the expand what's called the expander property of the horizontal time slices of the graph of hash values is minimized by how the graph is drawn.
And also that's what guarantees but that's what offers liveness in the system. Because if you were to simply say we had our 20 chain architecture we have today, if you were to simply just have every chain refer to every single other chain, as you point out, that would be a huge bandwidth hog. But to my mind, even more importantly, it means that you can't make any progress, that one chain stops the progress of all the chains, whereas because of the properties you're describing, this allows that wavefront, we call it a cut in the Lars Kutz design. That cut doesn't have to represent, the cut represents this kind of this thing that's got a shape of whatever represents the most what is the stuff that's gotten done recently, and that's a very important property, which is why Chainweb is able to just keep moving forward, is because of those that what you're saying, that minimizing the amount of edges that you need to traverse at any moment in time.
Right. So I think let's stop the combinatorics lesson, and
it's good though, because I think this is something that it's just good for people to know that you were there when we were really kind of putting pen to paper and finalizing this design. It wasn't it's not like it was a rubber stamp. It was something where there was we really needed to know what the properties of the system were from a security and kind of from a just an operational point of view, and then really be able to talk about the algorithms. Importantly, you worked on the security paper, but even in the Chainweb paper proper that Will and I wrote, that helped us ground our design discussion in the language that makes it recognizable to practitioners what we're actually doing in Chainweb. So that's all extremely important.
Well, to practitioners and people who want to reason about the system too.
Yeah, exactly. And
so it's a pleasure to be there. I mean, a pleasure to be there. And let's thank Jonathan Mohan again for giving us an occasion to meet.
Well, let's. I think it would be a good time to let me just scan through. So I will grab some questions here. There's a recent one here. People don't know this, but Stuart Haber is going to take over Pact, and I'm going to go to, I'm going to go on vacation for the next 2 years.
God forbid, that would be no. Very irresponsible business decision.
However, we are doing some fun work that we're going to be teasing in an article soon, which has to do with the very thing we were talking about with the things that make Pact secure, is trying to really get a kind of compelling and I don't know, an elegant way to talk about Pact security architecture.
How about the word principled, if you want to?
Well, I mean, this is where, it is principled. And what's interesting though is that it represents some of the operational parts of Pact that actually don't show up in the language, but have more to do with how multi-sig works and how that interfaces with the language. And these are things that, kind of like the Bitcoin paper doesn't really go into full detail about the Bitcoin script system. The Pact paper doesn't, gives some indication of what these things are, but some of the work we'll be doing there is to be able to talk from the literature of would you call it? It's symbolic cryptography.
So we hope to draw a bit on a thread of research, sort of formal methods and pure protocol research. Who sent what kind of message to whom by following the rules, linking that world of research to the world of hardcore pure crypto research, that basing security on hard computational problems.
Right. That's the Abadi et al. Paper so that first establishes that linkage between the.
So for those who actually care to get these references, that's a paper by Phil Rogway from the who represented the crypto world in that partnership, and Martin Abadi who represented the formal methods world?
So this, I thought this was an interesting question because this is work we want to do. So, you know, one of the things that happens when you're working on interesting problems is that, you know, there's so many problems, and, you know, you got to do them one at a time. You got to kind of, so they said Haber was working on the decentralized bridge design. So I think this came up when this is work we want to do, which is that this has to do with, so our bonding-based security is basically based on the Tezos proof of stake model. And that uses a random oracle to select, and one important property is that when you put something into the blockchain to be endorsed by bonders who have put up stake in order to be able to assert that this indeed is a header from the, in this case, Ethereum, but, you know, tomorrow it'll be Celo, or, you know, any Polkadot or any system like this, is that it's very important that we make a random selection of those bonders who will sign off on it, so that you can't game knowing who's going to be called upon to verify this particular thing. And that I remember when I brought that up, you're like, oh, how are you doing that?
Well, of course, the first question a cryptographer asked there, you said, you know, how do you choose those guys? Randomly? Really? How? And I surprised Stuart in that particular conversation when I said, and by the way, do you know the first? So when Kadena deploys this, it will not be the first deployment of random, or more precisely pseudo-random choice of an entity in the blockchain world. But in fact, Scott and I first suggested pseudo-random choice, again without a complete mathematical proof that it was that it had all the properties that we needed, but it is there in our very first paper.
Right, and so here, what we'd be seeking to kind of formalize is our use of, you know, the basic source of randomness is the previous block hash, you know, the previous block proof of work hash, combined with, you know, I think it's mixed with a few other things, but you know, those are interesting questions because, you know, after all, something like, you can't rely on you'd think a transaction hash is a good example of something that's random, but that's something that could be mined if you know what the target algorithm is, then, you know, so you know, like a true cryptographer, you're like, okay, let's talk about this, because, you know, it's not something that you can just take for granted. Oh, well, there's one of those gobbledygook hash values. That'll work great.
Right. And as I said, the cryptography world, both practitioners and pure researchers were completely gobsmacked when they realized in 2004 how little we knew about designing and attacking hash functions. An unknown researcher came out of nowhere and showed she and her students could compute hash collisions. So we're still learning, catching up there. I mean, a lot of progress has been made. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology in the U.S. has run since then has run a worldwide competition to choose new hash function designs, so we're learning. So in any case, for the particular case of the decentralized bridge, the only way I can realistically help Kadena is help pin down the security properties of what they're doing there.
Well, and that's where some of this work we're doing on PAC right now, you know, you're well on your way to understanding, you know, to a full understanding. Well, and indeed, probably the first full articulation of the whole PAC security model. Even though this is just one part of it, it's implemented in PAC. So, you know, so it'll be important to be able to rest on, you know, kind of assertions about the PAC system when the time comes to work on that. This one I wanted to throw in here just because don't know where that comes from. Does this ring a bell?
George Davidson.
No?
I don't know, but I'll be talking to Scott. I'll be talking to Scott later this afternoon. I'll write down his name. Or yeah, no. So sorry, doesn't ring a bell right now. Oh, Bell Labs. Sorry, Bell Labs.
Oh, that's probably what it is. Bellcore versus Bell Labs. Right?
So in fact,
because that's like Bjarne Strostrup and those folks. That's Bell Labs, right?
Right. So there was Bellcore, Bell Labs. After a while, later on. In fact, I'm declining a call from Scott right now. I don't know if if he's watching now. He's
trying to bomb. He's
right.
couldn't bomb, so now he's calling.
Right. So, in the world of mathematics and computer science, lots of people have passed through Bell Labs and Bellcore and all these. People sometimes use the phrase Bell Labs diaspora.
That makes sense. This from somebody who looks a lot like Bill Gates. Potato asks, is Kadena ready to transfer the stock market on Chainweb? This is a chance for me to talk about one of our boasts a little. So my background, I worked on blockchain systems for JP Morgan for 3 years before founding Kadena. But before that, I was in there. I was building trading exchange systems for them, equity agency algorithmic system that was doing somewhere in the order of 600 million shares a day for client flow. But before that, I worked for a small company, a small algorithmic company that was in the process of becoming a broker dealer. And I learned all about how the sausage gets made with the stock market, which is that, and this is an interesting point, that when people talk about things like fast finality, and they think that that's critical for blockchain, and someone else asked, are we like the modern version of BTC and Ethereum? And I would argue we are, simply because I think what Bitcoin and then Ethereum with its proof of work system shows is that in the end, the most valuable component of a blockchain system is the fact that you can settle. And once a certain confirmation depth is reached, you can have a lot of confidence that that transaction will never be broken. In the future. This is something, most people don't know, that the US stock market actually takes a number of days to settle. And in fact, it's not, when we say we can settle the stock market on Kadena, the reason why we say that is because the actual amount of settlement positions is a relatively small number compared to how many trades are actually happening on the system. So if you wanted to replace the New York Stock Exchange, that would be something you do on like a layer 2, or you do it something where you want to have that kind of, you'd be locking up certain amounts and be able to interact very quickly. But because Stuart and I can't just walk to NYSE and start trading, you actually have to be a registered participant. Kadena today with 20 chains could easily on a daily basis handle settling the trades of the stock market, and in the future basically settle trades from all the blockchains and all the stock exchanges in the world, simply because we're able to scale. And most importantly, 30 seconds sounds slow until you realize that the stock market takes 2 days, and something like Visa takes a month. In the sense that you can be breaking a Visa. So if you realize the difference between making a payment and clearing a payment, you start to see how the original Bitcoin system is lightning fast. The idea that you can have solid confirmation of something after an hour, that's faster than any other system in the world. And so we've taken that down to a matter of minutes, scalably. So with that, I think we're at the hour. So Stuart, it's so great to talk to you, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to come to talk to the Kadena crowd and all the people who've joined us. I want to thank all the participants for asking such nice questions.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to talk to you online as well as, of course, offline.
Yep. And well, let's do it again. I think we have some work to do, but I think once that stuff is out, I think we'll have more things to talk about. And someone asked for teasers. Can't give any teasers right now, but there's other things we're working on. You can be sure of that. So. All right, so thanks again to everybody for joining us. We'll be doing this again. Thanks again so much to Stuart Haber and see you around.
Okay. So long, folks.
Bye.
Good night. Good night. Good evening. Good morning.
Bye.